Welcome back to the home front. I'm your host, Reed Galen. Today, I'm joined by Carlos Alvarez-Aranyos. He is the founder of American Opposition, a non-connected political action committee established to counter the rise of fascism here in the United States. The organization serves as a strategic communications and community engagement hub for the opposition movement. He has also founded the American Sunlight Project, of which I am an advisory board member, a bipartisan effort to counter the threat of disinformation to American democracy. In 2020, he oversaw Project Democracy's organization-wide communications, media relations, and strategic communications campaign to protect the election. He has also worked on things related to the January 6th Commission, doing things against Donald Trump for president, working for the Community Success Initiative versus Moore, Cervini versus Cisneros at STAP. Beyond his election-related efforts, Carlos has provided strategic communications counsel to a broad range of clients, including the U.S. Department of Defense, the Howard G. Buffett Foundation, HSBC, the Yacht Club de Monaco, that must be fun, and the California Federal Public Defender's Office. Earlier in his career, Carlos built Boulder Transportation from a $7,000 investment into one of the most respected ground and air transportation providers in Colorado. He also published the Listín Diario, the largest newspaper in the Caribbean region, on the internet, and wrote and produced feature films. My goodness, Carlos, you have been busy. He's also, if that wasn't enough, an avid adventurer, motorcyclist, mandolinist, boxer, dive master, and cook. Carlos, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Reed. Really excited to be with you.
There's a lot there. You have quite the bio, but I want to start here. There have been thousands and thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, even maybe it's now millions of people who have taken to the streets since Donald Trump's re-inauguration and taking office. Tell us, from the sidewalk, what's the world look like?
Yeah, so, it's funny, Reed. In 2020, as you mentioned, I worked for Protect Democracy, overseeing a strategic communications campaign to protect the election. Donald Trump was in office. And that experience, 49 national campaigns, everything from the Wall of Moms through the second impeachment trial and the certification of the election. I don't know if you remember Emily Murphy and that whole, down to the Biden bus that was attacked in Texas.
Sure.
It was interesting that I was placed in the middle of sort of the main game in 2020. And then in late January, right after the inauguration, I think it was January 24th, I became concerned that the Democrats were really sucking at my job, which is strategic comms. And so I just sensed that I needed to do something to create what they weren't creating. Because coming out of the transition, I assumed that they would brand an opposition campaign, kind of like what the Republicans did with the Contract with America during the Clinton years, something that was branded, that was unified under a single strategy that everybody could feed, and a vision, not just for how to remove Trump, but for what needed changing within the party and then what needed changing within the country, and an affirmative vision for the future. And that just didn't come. And so after the inauguration, and the first sort of set of executive actions that I saw, I got really angry at the Democrats for failing to do some really basic stuff. And I made a call. I basically said, look, everybody needs to take to the streets. We need to go out and protest on February 5th back then. Concurrently, and without my knowledge, 50-51, what would become 50-51 was just starting at that around the same time. And so those two efforts coalesced. Theirs were state capitals. My vision was state capitals, city halls, and town halls. So that got kind of married. And collectively, I think it grew a movement. After the 5th, we did the President's Day one on February 17th. And that sort of every 2 weeks-ish type of model has now taken hold. But it's amazing because it all started with just me being angry, but also, and I found it interesting, that I had direct experience fighting Donald Trump. For me to be the guy where that gained traction the second time around seemed really serendipitous, but it also meant that I could leverage that experience that I'd had in 2020 directly again this year to try to help. And obviously what I did with Nina and the American Sunlight Project last year as well, which you're really familiar with. So again, life sometimes puts you in the right place at the right time, gives you the tools you need. It just felt like this moment was being built so that I could participate in a way that harnessed all of that stuff that I had learned.
And so when obviously the demonstrations have been a success from a body perspective. There's a lot of people coming out. Who are the folks that are showing up to these?
Yeah. So first, I'll talk about the organizers because I want to credit them. There's us, and we serve as you mentioned, as a hub for strategy and comms. And our vision is to do strategic communications campaigns, opposition research. For example, we're talking to former military flag officers to try to understand where the military's at. That kind of work. A lot of it is behind the scenes. And it feeds my strength, which is, complex diplomacy and stuff about laying out a strategy and a unified vision. On the national organizing front, we have 5051, and they aggregate organizers from around the country and they lead them to develop what you're seeing out on the streets. And then there's Indivisible, which started as a grassroots local organizing effort and is now also feeding those national protests. So that's the triumvirate that's currently sort of running the movement, if you will. And then the people showing up, I spoke to about 30,000 veterans on the National Mall. I think the veterans movement is a huge part of this. On June 6th, we called for and are hosting a national day of protest, and the Union Veterans Council and others, Unite for Veterans is the name of the coalition. It's every single veterans group is going to show up. And that's a huge driver of this. Another driver that we're seeing is the unions and workers, because obviously everything that Donald Trump is doing to undermine labor is coming to a head, and that's about to get way worse as these tariffs kick in. But frankly, generationally speaking, I think we're seeing a lot of Gen Xers show up, people that sort of understand the context of the moment and that are really worried. Sometimes, it fills you with hope that you see like Holocaust survivors and World War II veterans who are, frail and they can't travel, but they still show up. And that has been for me the most satisfying part of this. But just to give you an anecdotal example, yesterday, a single veteran organized called for people to show up at the Civic Plaza in Albuquerque and ended up kind of canceling last minute. And I showed up, but and then 300 people just emerged from a single call and 2 hours before. And then suddenly we did a march through Albuquerque, which I got to lead. So a lot of this is it's just people who are really looking to put their energy somewhere constructive. And I think we, along with 5051 and Indivisible, have given people a framework for understanding how they can participate. And it's not just a protest. Look at Tesla. We called for a boycott of Tesla. Many others have taken that and run with it, including Tesla Takedown and other efforts. And now you're seeing that we've cut into Elon Musk by about $200 billion. Elon tweeted that I'm evil because of it.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I think that means that I'm doing something right. But yeah, generally speaking, I think we're seeing people try to figure out how to leverage their power individually and how we can then leverage our power collectively. And that's what this movement's all about. It's about giving people a way to make a difference, because it's something that the Democrats have failed to learn. And I think you and I agree on this, is a unified strategy that everybody feeds is the only way to go forward. It's great that AOC and Bernie and a couple of others are doing the right things, but unless you're feeding a branded unified vision of the world, something affirmative, something that people can rally behind, leadership that people can follow, you're not going to get anywhere. And right now, that absence of leadership means that groups like us are taking up the slack where the Democrats are failing, and giving people a sense of purpose and meaning and something that they feel that they can do to make a difference in this pivotal moment.
And so, what is that vision? What is the the unifying thread that's bringing you and 5051 and Indivisible? What is that common thread?
Well, we believe in America. I think that's the first thing. I think claiming patriotism is super important, and I think we shouldn't hesitate to do it. This country is never perfect. Obama talked about fits and starts. I think we've experienced these declines before, but we've never experienced them in a moment when technology and the ability to organize are where they are right now. And that has helped Trump, but it can also help us, right?
Right.
And Trump being sort of such an overt threat, I think, has also mobilized people. But that's not really what we're in it for. We're in it for a future where oligarchy gets replaced with equity. I mean, that's foundationally what we're talking about here. Mm-hmm. Because the reality is that the wealth inequality in the U.S. right now is worse than it was in Egypt right before the Arab Spring. And I grew up in the Dominican Republic under an elected fascist, under what a guy named Joaquin Balaguer, who was what Trump wants to be, right? And so what's bringing us all together is this vision that this country is really not working fairly. And it's not even a partisan thing. It's just some basic stuff. Like, wealth inequality, the fact that anybody believes that the words diversity, equity, inclusion, that those things are negative things in a country that calls itself a melting pot and that identifies itself that way. And really what we're dealing with is a generational struggle against white supremacy, against other forms of oppression. And the reality is that I think we're all finally just a little bit fed up. And the fact that Trump is putting it all so clearly out there for all to see gives us a rallying cry to say, look, we're not just here to replace Trump. We're here to build a better country, a place where people can feel like they have a shot, right? And I know that that sounds sort of recycled because those are sort of the populist messages of forever. But the reality is, like, we're not claiming credit. We want to leave this field as soon as we're done. Nobody here is getting paid to be here. We're showing up for the country because we don't know what else to do and because we demand a better world, right? And frankly, I think the entire world is taking notice, so it's making a difference.
So you mentioned things like the Tesla takedown. You've mentioned, which is a practical thing, right? And you can see the results of it, which is Elon's mad. As I heard someone say the other night, his board is just could not be more ripshit with him. They're like, either you come back or we're going to start a search for a CEO, right? So like, because like they're business people, right? They got a business to run. Let's be clear that the Tesla valuation was always completely out of whack for a car company, right? But only because of him. You know, if his name was Elon Ford, it wouldn't be worth what it is. And so now you've got people, but you know, something you said about the Arab Spring triggered something in me, not triggered something, reminded me of something. So the thing that the protesters and all the people that went to Tahrir Square got right was that when they showed up in mass, it drove Mubarak away. The problem was that wasn't enough. That was step one. But step two was creating a framework of not only belief, but also infrastructure, organization, and even what the skeleton of another government would look like. Because as soon as Mubarak was gone and that vacuum occurred, Carlos, the only two groups that that had the infrastructure and the planning in place were either the Muslim Brotherhood or the military. Right. And so you traded one bad guy for I don't know enough about Egyptian politics to get involved in whether or not they're good or bad.
One bad guy for another bad guy.
For another bad guy. Yeah. Or you saw like with it just recently in Syria, right? Like Assad is gone, but the guys that replaced him, not exactly nice guys either. So what are you doing to build on the people that are coming out? What's the organization? What's the structure look like? How does it ladder up to something that's more than, which is important, which is people making their voices heard, but also understanding that like, okay, so Reed, I went to a rally, right? Because I saw it on social media. I got an email about it. But what are you doing with me next? Like what happens after I've shown up, after I've filled something out? What do you do next?
Yeah. So first you have to show up, right? So the protests are step one, and that's about showing this government that the people will not stand idly by while they take over. Now, I will say, and it's very important, those examples are different because they overthrew their constitutional orders in order to arrive at a better, or as you said, at a different outcome, right? They've replaced one bad guy with another, or whatever the case may be, but in the process, they had to rebuild an entire system. That is not our goal. We want to be very specific. We love the U.S. Constitution and we would like to keep the U.S. Constitution. Now, that's not to say that we don't need to, for example, overturn Citizens United. And if that requires a constitutional amendment, then that is going to be part of our mandate afterwards. But as it stands right now, we are not looking to overthrow the government of the United States at all. What we would like to see is for Trump to be removed. Because, first of all, he's ineligible to be president because he engaged in insurrection under the 14th Amendment, Section 3. So he's not even supposed to be there. But if you accept that he's there, then he is definitively the least responsible person in history to hold that office. And what he's doing is either he's working for the Russians or he's doing exactly what the Russians would want him to do. And regardless of how you get to that outcome, he has to be removed. Never mind that what he's doing in terms of committing crimes against humanity, sending people to El Salvador, deporting American citizens, which, by the way, a single instance of that is a high crime, right? The moment you take an American citizen particularly a child with cancer, and you eject them from the country, that is a high crime. There could not be a greater definition of tyranny than that. And so our goal is for him to be removed through our constitutional order. And our hope is that Congress will eventually do its job once they understand that their incentives are tied to his outcomes in a very direct way. So, for example, we know that Republican congressmen come January are going to be worried about reelection. Now, having a midterm election is also our first goal. Just getting to the next election and having it be a fair election is step one. And that's what the protests are about. That's what the boycotts are about. It's about making sure that we reclaim the construct of power that allows us to have a free and fair election where we get to decide one more time what we want to do vis-a-vis Donald Trump. That next Congress then becomes our vehicle for restoring our order and for improving upon it. And again, none of this is going to be clean or clear. I want to make sure people understand there are many pain points involved from here to then, particularly, and I think one of the things that's going to motivate a lot of people is when the store shelves are empty because of these tariffs in a week or 2 weeks or in a month or 2 months, depending on how many people pre-ordered, basically. Right. We're going to see an economic calamity, the likes of which we haven't experienced since the Great Depression. And so the question is, how do we galvanize that? And I think we are trying to build a movement that allows people to harness that energy constructively, that gives us a seat at the table, because somebody was saying, well, what if the Democrats, basically do it again and just let the Republicans overwhelm them next time? No, this opposition is going to have a seat at the table by the time this is all said and done. But again, it's about building a structure, like you mentioned, that gives people a place to go, not just in protest and boycott, but in terms of participating in a conversation about how we rebuild so that Trump can never happen again, so that the oligarchical system that we're under gets changed. For example, the federal minimum wage having not been raised for 15 years while oligarchs everywhere are making trillions upon trillions of dollars, that has to change. That's not a sustainable model. The reason we brought up Egypt is because every time wealth inequality gets as bad as it is in the United States right now, you get a civil war. Those causal relationships are real. Mm-hmm. And so what we're trying to do is figure out a way, and again, through volunteers and through rising it from the grassroots, is to figure out a way to channel the anger, the power, the disappointment, and the love and the hope of the American people, and give it a place to go, kind of like being able to point it, right, as a weapon, right. And then make sure that politicians understand. And by the way, not just Republican. Chuck Schumer is a huge part of our problem. Hakeem Jeffries, a huge part of our problem. These people have to understand that their legacy structure, that the politicians exist within a patronage system as of right now, and they feel so comfortable that they can't operate outside of it. We're going to make sure that patronage system gets taken away from them. From now on, we want to make sure that politicians have to be responsive to the American people, and that this bullshit about donors giving to both parties and both parties being beholden to Amazon or Tesla or mm-hmm. Target, that those days are over. Now, again, none of this is going to be perfect or clean or whatever. We're going to suffer, sadly, because we elected Donald Trump and because we don't want to overwhelm our constitutional system. But we want to make sure that the country we get out of this is a country where this can never happen again. I mean, we can't keep making these choices and expecting to survive.
So you mentioned at the top something that I think you have said, I've said, many people have said. What is there in your mind, having done this a long time like I have, what is the fundamental flaw in the Democrats' inability or unwillingness to either A, have a message, or B, demonstrate leadership? Now, I understand that like at the federal level, they don't have any power, right? I get that. But I'll be honest with you, Carlos, sitting on the steps of the Capitol singing songs, like it ain't doing it for me, man. Like it's just not doing it for me. So what's the problem? Is it to your point, the legacy system they're locked in? As I've noted with Schumer, this is a guy who's been in elective office since 1975. There's a really good chance he just can't see the world in another way. But what do you think is the issue, and what if we know that if the next big thing we have to do to push back is an election, how do we work with or help point the Democratic Party in a direction where it can demonstrate leadership and frankly win in 15 months.
Well, the problem is that you're right. The system doesn't help in all of those things. But the reality is that it's much more fundamental than that. It's about archetypal genders. If you think about it, and I'm obviously not talking about sex or gender in the normative sense, I'm talking about archetypally. Republicans represent the archetypal male. They're strong, they're dominant, they're simple, they keep it super stupid. They tell you what they think. They are not afraid to be wrong. They just hit you with information. They repeat it as often as they need to.
Right.
They represent strength and vigor and all of these things. Whereas the Democrats represent the archetypal female, more intelligent, more capable, but more nuanced, more debate, more intellect, less simple, right? The messaging is more complex. It requires more thought, more analysis, etc. Now, we live in a country where the average American reads at a 7th grade level. That means we're essentially, when we're messaging, we're supposed to be talking to a 12-year-old, right? That's a 7th grader is a 12-year-old child. Now, the Democrats have had people like Anat Shenker-Asario and a bunch of other messengers. And I know you and I agree on this. Obama will tell you that communications was his administration's greatest weakness. And yet Biden hired the same people. Harris hired the same people. So you can't look to keep doing the same things and achieve a different result. I think we have to reverse the polarity of the archetypal gender of the Democratic Party and make it a party that claims the ability to say simple things, to repeat them often. One of the things, for example, we want to do is a national digital billboard campaign called the Trump scorecard, because Trump plays golf, right? What were the numbers when he took office? What are they now? Green, red, right? Put those everywhere. We're trying to fundraise for that. Because honestly, what the Democratic Party needs to do is to figure out how to connect with people. I did an analysis of all of the messaging in 2020 that came from the Democratic Party. And I mean all of it. And none of it read at lower than an 11th grade level, which means none of what they were saying was being heard. And ultimately, the problem is there's a snobbery to the whole thing. And there's like pride, because there's the Twitter crowd, or what used to be the Twitter crowd, the academic crowd, the sort of the showrunners, if you will. And they talk to each other in this endless echo chamber. And they get impressed when they give each other facts that they didn't know or whatever. But they summarily ignore the needs of the American people in terms of how they consume information, where it comes from, how they validate it, and how they use it. Like, it's not just telling people things they understand. It's telling them things they understand in a way that motivate them to participate or react or get emotional. I mean, a Kim Kardashian country elects Donald Trump. So we need to figure out how to operate in a Kim Kardashian country. And honestly, until the Democratic Party gets off its high horse and figures out that communicating with people is not about what you believe to be right or smart or makes you look good, but it's about what they hear, what they see, what resonates with them, what makes them feel heard, seen, understood, etc. Until that transition happens, we're just spitting into the wind. And Chuck Schumer, and by the way, even people like Bernie Sanders, who can get a lot of people out, they're still not connecting with the audiences that are connecting with Donald Trump. And in some ways, I mean, the main thing is, think about it, the Democratic strategy last year was to call Trump supporters stupid and then ask them to vote for them. And you can't, that's not a winning strategy. You can't say to somebody, hey man, you're a moron, please vote for me. Like, that's never going to work. And so ultimately, can we get out of this echo chamber? Can we figure out how to talk to people as people? Can we motivate them? And the answer is yes. And I know that because late January, I got angry. I work in communications. I started talking to people. And millions of people have shown up, and not just because of me. 5051 has done the same thing. Indivisible has done the same thing. Indivisible is run by two people who used to work in Congress who are really smart people, but they're able to connect with audiences all throughout the country and give them a sense of purpose and meaning. Like, this is a place you can go, man, and be heard. At these meetings, you won't be excluded, right? You can talk about your fears. You can even reveal, by the way, we are also too perfect on the left. We're too precious. We demand that everybody always say the right thing and do the right thing. And guess what? You can't tell people that what their grandparents taught them and what their parents taught them is wrong and then ask them to vote for you. That's not a sensible way. People need to be led to change. They can't be demanded to change. And part of the problem in this whole construct of woke is not really about our beliefs. It's about forcing people to change and making it so that if they mess up once, they're forever invalid.
Right.
We need to become much more cognizant of the fact that people are going to be imperfect, that taking them to the water doesn't mean they'll drink, that our job is to lead, is to figure out how to meet them where they are. And even if they don't agree with us 100%, we don't have to exclude them. We can say, look, man, if a big tent means a big tent, and if the Democratic Party has always claimed that it wants to be a big tent, it has to allow for people who are different to engage together. And one thing we're modeling in this movement better than anything else is that a bunch of different people are showing up. We don't always agree, but we know that Donald Trump is a problem and we got to get rid of it. Now we have to do the same thing after Donald Trump, is figure out, we love our Constitution, we love our republic. This is worth fighting for. And we have to come to an accommodation and figure out a way to live together. You know?
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, I said this just this week to another group of pretty senior Democrats, and I've said it before, is for me, the Democratic Party wants to be a big tent, but it doesn't have a very big door. Right. Makes it really hard to get in, and even harder, Carlos, to stay there because, you know, to your point, like there's no accounting for humanity. Right. But there's also a very strong sense of do as I say, not as I do. I expect perfection from you, but don't expect it from me. And if you expect it from me, how dare you? Right. And look, I think that's really hard. That's really hard to be a broad-based movement if everything is one more hurdle to being accepted when you demand 100% acceptance for your beliefs, but refuse them for anybody else's. All right. Tell us what's next on the calendar. What's next for you? What's next for the movement?
Well, it was a super tricky diplomacy to figure it out, but we got it done, which is June 6th is the anniversary of D-Day. Mm-hmm. And we are locked in on the largest veterans demonstration in the history of the United States. The Union Veterans Council and Vote Vets, others, every veterans group in this country basically is organizing both in D.C. and throughout the nation through 5051 veterans. And our hope is to have every single veteran in this country come out. And it's not just about Trump. It's about cuts to veterans' benefits. As Lincoln said, our main job is to take care of our veterans. We are failing in that job. Their benefits are being cut. We're seeing damage done to that community. The veteran voice, we believe, is a voice that the media can't ignore. So whereas I work in communications as a professional, and I can tell you the media blockade of what we're doing is very real. They just don't want to talk about it for whatever reason. And I think part of it is because we're aiming our shots at oligarchs, and those oligarchs own the media. So there's a conflict of interest there for the media. But in our experience so far, the veterans' voice is impossible for the media to ignore. So for veterans to come out and lead and to put their voices front and center, June 6th is the anniversary of D-Day. I hope it will be the beginning of the end of fascism in the United States as it was in Europe during World War II. So we're hoping that we get every single veteran and then every single American to come out. That's the day I hope we breach 10 million Americans on the street. And I hope that becomes the story, that veterans led over 10 million people out to the streets to reclaim this country and to fight for other veterans and to figure out, again, to give us, meaning us, American opposition, 50-51, indivisible, the power to then speak on behalf of our crowds and get the political outcomes. Because as you well know, it's one thing to protest or boycott, et cetera, but it's a different thing to translate that into political power and turn it into political outcomes. And so part of this transition is veteran-led, and we're hoping that day we get the power to finally tell Donald Trump to sit down and hopefully to get Congress to start listening. And again, as those Republican congressmen start to become aware that their careers are going to end, because I promise you, their careers will end if they continue on this track. And I'm going to make that a personal guarantee. I will make sure you lose if you continue to support Donald Trump. And I know many others who will do the same. And we're going to have the power of the American people behind us. And we're not interested in power ourselves. I'm never going to run for office. After this is done, I want to be forgotten. But in the meantime, I'm going to make sure that we leverage this power to ensure that anybody who supports this regime on an ongoing basis is removed from office. And that includes Democrats, Republicans. I don't really care. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, they better hear me on this, that we're going to galvanize the American people. We are going to fix what's broken. And if that's them, they're going to be removed. And so, again, that begins on June 6th for us, I think, as the greatest demonstration of American veteran power, hopefully in defense of other veterans and in defense of the American.
Well, we'll make sure to keep the drumbeat going between now and then. Before we let you go, where can we find you online? Where can we find you on social media? Where can we find your work?
Yeah, so AmericanOpposition.org is our website. Please donate. We've had, we work behind the scenes and we never claim credit for any of our work. So we have a difficult time fundraising because people don't always know that it's us or what we're doing. When we do opposition research, we get it out through others. So our presence ideally we are where we need to be, and we don't really like to toot our own horn. That said, we really do need to raise money for our billboard campaign, we're trying to build an app. So AmericanOpposition.org, please make sure to visit the website, sign up for the newsletter, and donate. We're on Threads at American Opposition. We're on Blue Sky at AmericanOpposition.org. We're on Facebook. We're on LinkedIn. Just Google American Opposition. You'll find us. Me, I have a very complicated last name, but if you Google Carlos American Opposition, you'll find me. Please reach out. Please let us know your concerns. Please send us emails. We read all of them, I promise you. And we want to make sure that we're connected to the people who are out there on the streets. And more importantly, and the final thing I want to say is, I just want to thank people, because I started as an angry Dominican guy, not knowing exactly what to do. People answered my call. They answered 50 Vin's call. They've obviously answered Indivisible's calls. People are showing up. And the fact that you guys did that is really an astonishing thing. It's the American dream in action, right? So I just want to take a moment to thank everybody who's shown up for every single protest, everybody who's helped boycott Tesla. Elon Musk called me evil, but what he meant is that all of us are evil because we're all participating in a legal way to undercut his power. The next one is Amazon. Please boycott Amazon. That is my big call right now, is let's do to Amazon what we did to Tesla, and let Jeff Bezos know that colluding with Trump is not going to be acceptable going forward. These people are Nazis, and anybody who stands with Nazis is an enemy of freedom. Fascism is violence. Democracy is peace. These people don't know what they're getting in for. And by the way, the funniest thing is Donald Trump isn't loyal to anybody. So no matter what you give him, he'll just keep taking. Right. He's never going to redeem you for your loyalty to him. So these people need to understand that they need to stop supporting this regime, or that we will make them feel it. So if you're Amazon, if you're Target, if you're Tesla, you will hear from us. You will continue to hear from us. One thing we're trying to change in this movement is that Americans have a short memory. That's going to change. We're going to make sure that we extend the length of our memory and make sure that people understand that we will forever remember everyone who stood on the side of fascism and against democracy. And if we lose this country to an orange clown because people couldn't find their spines, and if you're a university, if you're anybody and you're submitting to this, the law firms in particular, my God, you people are supposed to protect the rule of law. It's your entire livelihood. And you're submitting to Donald Trump and modeling the worst possible example for your profession and basically debasing yourself. Anybody who does that going forward is going to hear from us. Because again, we are not interested in power in any way, shape, or form. I want to go ride motorcycles and forget about the world. But in the meantime, while I'm here, I'm going to make it my personal responsibility to make sure that everybody who stood with this tyrant get held accountable for that for as long as they live. This is going to be a long memory situation. The American people are going to remember, because this country is worth fighting.
Well, amen to that. As always, gang, you can find me on Twitter, TikTok, and Says Us at Reed Galen, on Threads and Instagram at Reed_Galen USA. Carlos, thanks for joining me. Thanks for all your work.
Thank you.
And everybody else, we'll see you next time. All right.